Welcome to Doctors at Work. My name's Matt Daniel and this podcast is about doctors' careers. Today I'm having a conversation with Ellen Nelson-Rowe and we're talking about how to succeed in your first foundation job. Ellen has just completed hers. Now, starting work as a doctor must be one of the most stressful career transitions. And in this episode, Ellen advises others to be ready for the significant jump in responsibility and also to recognise that actually they do have a large body of knowledge to call on. Self-care is important too, both for short-term stress management as well as for long-term career longevity. And whilst the focus may be on your clinical job, doctors also need to remember the importance of learning, portfolio building and longer-term career planning. Welcome, Ellen. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hello, so I'm Ellen. I'm an F1 doctor in the East Midlands. I studied at Cardiff University, graduated last July. A bit more about myself. I'm really interested in surgery. That's what I want to do for my future career, particularly ENT as well, actually. And I'm also would like to have like a portfolio career, so I'm involved in a lot of leadership. I'm on the academic foundation program for medical education, and I like to keep myself busy outside of work.
And I invited you to talk about how to succeed in your first F1 post because you've just completed your first F1 post. So
Yes.
tell me, what was it like?
Wow, it was a bit of a whirlwind. So I started on general surgery, which I think is very well known that general surgery is probably one of the busiest jobs to start on as an F1. But I'm really glad I did start on it because I think it propels you just to really just learn on the job. Everyone always talks about the jump between med school and F1, and until you go through it yourself, it's hard to really understand like the big jump. And I think the main reasons for that is, I think, first of all, the responsibility. I think as a medical student, often you can say, oh, I've got teaching and just leave off early, but actually the patients truly do become your priorities. If it's 5 p.m. and a patient is sick, you can't just go all the time. Sometimes you do have to stay. I think the length, the duration of the shift as well is quite a big shift because we didn't really do many on-calls or like long 12-hour shifts in med school, and actually just even getting accustomed to like eating and breaks, that's been really hard. But also just in terms of what you're experiencing, when it comes to, for example, end of life care or acutely unwell patients, there's only so much simulation you can do in med school, but until you're actually thrown into the deep end and actually, doing it yourself on the board, I think there's a lot to learn. I think my first few weeks, I think the first time experiences lots of things kind of panics you, and then after a while you just become so accustomed to it. But I realized that as I progressed through the rotation, so at first I was really nervous, wasn't sure, and then as you start getting that confidence and experience, by the end of it, even though I finished on night shift, because I built so much experience just from the past 3 months, it's just amazing the steep learning curve that you go through. So you have to, when they have that graph where you kind of learn and then get that sort of graph, it really is like that.
Let's go back to maybe when you finished medical school. I'm interested in this idea of how much of a jump it is. I mean, what were you expecting before you started?
Good question. I think when you study as a final year med student, I think you just expect that you're doing quote unquote a lot of the admin work. So the discharge letters, some of the bloods, kind of scribing a ward round. I don't think I actually had fully anticipated how much you start off on. What I mean by that is, say if you're on call or you're on night shifts, if you're usually are the first person who is called unless it is serious, like for an acutely unwell patient. And actually, although you do escalate for help, the fact that you are the first point of call and you sort of have to know what is the right thing to initiate, I think can be quite nerving. I don't think I anticipated how much of responsibility that actually is. And I think, what else did I expect? I think I expected less responsibility, actually. I think, to contradict myself. I didn't expect to be able to do as much as you get to do as an F1, or just knowing where your limitations are. Actually, you really are thrown in, and you are still respected as a doctor. Because in my head, I thought, okay, I'm an F1, so they're still going to sort of treat me as like a baby doctor, but actually, no, you're a doctor regardless. And then obviously, there's only certain things within your limitation depending on your specialty of training as well.
Mm. So certainly there's something there, we can all ask for help, isn't it? Even as
Mm,
consultants, we ask for help, yeah. So
yeah.
that's not unique to foundation doctor, but it sounds like that there's a real big difference in that, one day you're a student and the next day you're a doctor,
Mm.
and you have all of these responsibilities as well as privileges and duties.
Yeah, it was a big jump for me because I graduated on the 17th of July and then our induction was on the 24th of July. So I didn't really have much time to just like really just kind of just relax into it. It was just straight into it.
How did your friends deal with that? All of a sudden, you have all of this responsibility. What was everybody else saying?
Think everyone cried a lot. And I don't mean that jovially. I know I definitely cried a lot more in the first month than I do now. But I think those are sort of tears of sort of just overwhelm. It's quite overwhelming. And tears of frustration as well because I think I know myself. I'm quite a perfectionist. I like being good at what I do.
Mm,
So when I feel like I'm not in control of a situation or I don't have we're not fully equipped to deal with something, I find that really frustrating.
mm,
So I think a lot of people, if anything, found it quite overwhelming, particularly, your first crash call or your first kind of death confirmation when it's you signing like the death certificates, like when you feel that when you really, particularly those like quote unquote life or death sort of scenarios, until you experience that for the first time and your name is being signed on stuff as the doctor, I think you really that when it really set in for me.
And how did you deal with those kind of how emotionally? How did you deal with that?
I think debriefing is so important. I I think I was saying to you earlier that so I've moved closer to home now. Before I used to live 4 hours away from home because of uni, and now home is only half an hour away, which is really great. So there were just sometimes I just went home for the weekend just to really just unwind, remove myself just from the environment. Calling my friends who in the same scenario, starting F1. It was really important to talk about it because it's very hard to leave the job at work. You think about stuff at home a lot, but actually processing with other people is so important, and also making sure that you're debriefing it with your seniors. So I remember my first crash call was probably like 4 days into me starting F1, and I know it sounds very silly, but I just wasn't expecting it, and of course you're never expecting it, but when you just thought, okay, that's going to come a bit later on. And I was just like a deer in the headlights. I was just really just overwhelmed by it. And actually, I was really grateful for the consultant and registrar to sit down with me and talk it through. And it's really comforting as well.
Mhm,
I've also heard of not my hospital, but I know my other friends. They actually have regular like group therapy. They actually have for their staff as well, which is really great as well. So yeah.
mhm. And in terms of preparing people for what F1 is like, what advice or what tips would you have for somebody who's finishing medical school?
So I think there's twofold to it. So I think there's the experience and there's the portfolio bit. So um I don't think people understand the portfolio requirements to F1 as well because the requirements have been a lot more relaxed. So we use a system called Horus in England where we upload all of our kind of mini CAXs, CBDs, those sort of kind of statutory requirements. Previously, there was a set number you had to achieve per rotation, but now they sort of removed that. So it's down to you. You have to set your own goals of what you'd like to achieve each rotation. And I think if you're not a naturally goal oriented person, that'd be quite difficult because you're not quite sure how much you're meant to do, and also you have to self motivate yourself to keep your portfolio up to date. Personally, I don't think they explain the portfolio very well. So I think it's really important that people starting F1, once you get access to those sort of portfolios, is really going through the websites, going through the help information, and listening to videos just so you understand what are the different types of skills and cases that you can get signed off. That's important for your portfolio. The importance of writing reflections is really good as well, and tracking your teaching and learning, because I think what will happen is when we get to ARCP time, a lot of people, if you're not staying on top of it and then all of a sudden you're trying to backdate everything till the year, it's very difficult to do. So actually how important it is to regularly stay on top of your portfolio, and I think we're sort of trained to do that through med school. Like every single rotation in med school is just, I need to get this signed off, I need to get signed off. And I don't think people realise that's just the beginning. There's constantly more things you have to get signed off, beyond med school. So I think people don't realise the extent of that. And then the second part into is preparing for the experience. I think actually just listening, I know it sounds silly, but I listen to quite a few YouTube videos of kind of F1 kind of blogs and vlogs of people just sharing their experiences. And I think that was quite useful because I really heard some first-hand experiences, knowing what to expect. Usually you get when you sign up for the MDU, we get the Oxford Handbooks of Foundation Training. That was really useful just to read over as well, because although you've been studying for finals, I mean, at my uni, we did finals in fourth year. So actually, my knowledge wasn't as on point as those who do their finals in final year. So actually, making sure you've just got a basic general line of information is important. And that's even more particularly important because although I started on general surgery, as the F1, you have to deal with all the medical stuff. So the registrars don't deal with just the surgery. But when it comes to high blood sugars, that's your responsibility. So you need to make sure you've got a bit of baseline across the whole thing. Yeah, so that's some things there.
It's interesting because there's so many competing things, and certainly if I think of that blood sugar, that I very much understand that, because if I think the patients that I see, if there's anything that is not pediatric airway related, I know very, very little about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right, because we totally rely on the foundation doctors or the core trainees to have that general medical knowledge,
Mm.
and also yeah, much more about high blood sugars than I do. I might be the consultant, yeah, but you know much more about high blood sugars than I do. So it's really interesting that jump in responsibility that perhaps people don't realize how much they know, and that often they do know more than the consultant.
Mm.
Certainly for some of the kind of general medical stuff, if you work with consultants that are specialized. But
Mm.
you've got all of these competing priorities because you've got to turn up and do the job, because that's where you're paid to do the job.
Mm.
Then you've got to learn somewhere along the line, and you've got to demonstrate that you progress in your careers with a portfolio and ARCPs. And by the way, that carries on for the rest of existence also, yeah.
So
So
I've heard.
completely echo that tip about keeping your portfolio going, because even as a consultant you still have to do all of that, yeah. Definitely suggest that, and then you've got to progress your career as well, because you've got to then build your CV in order to apply for the next step of your career. So
Mm.
there's so many competing priorities. I mean, how do you balance all of those things?
I think it depends on the type of person you are. So I'm very much a forward thinker. I almost think 2 years in advance all the time. So the moment that I got my specialized donation program job, I was already thinking, okay, so after this job, what am I doing after this? So um, I'm already in my mind trying to decide, am I going to do an F3 year, or am I just going to apply straight for core surgical training, which I think I will just try and apply and see because it's very competitive. But already you have to think, well, if I want to apply for core surgical training, that's something I have to do 4 months into me starting F2. So actually, not only do I need to, F1 is all about figuring out how to be a foundation doctor, it's also about preparing for the next step to apply for the next job, which actually I think, and it's perfectly okay if you don't know what you want to do. But I think if you do know what you want to do, being prepared is so important, and actually having some sort of kind of landmarks and goals setting for the future is really important. I mean, because I'm quite interested in leadership, I'm all about 5 year plans and 2 year plans. So I'm naturally inclined that way. So I know not many people are like that. But you have to think ahead to know what your priorities are, and also be flexible to know that things will come up, and know what your priorities are, whether that is family, whether is that your career, or that is a bit of both, or just enjoying life and knowing what your values are and knowing when to say no. I think as someone who's quite busy like myself, and I say yes to lots of things, but as I'm getting older and I'm realizing how important rest is actually, and being able to block off your time. So I'm very strict with my time. So before I would do meetings on Sundays, and as I got older and I shoved into my faith as well, like I'm not going to do meetings when I have church or if I've got church responsibilities because that's my priority. Or if I've, if my family is ill, my priority is going to be with my family. So it's being adaptable, but having a long-term goal in mind and breaking those down to the short-term goals, I think is really important.
I hope you're enjoying the show. Please click subscribe so you'll be notified when new episodes become available. This podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. You can be part of that mission too by forwarding this show to one person who you think might benefit from listening. Thank you. Now on with the show. If I go back to the people that don't know what they want to do, I mean, what advice would you give to somebody who says, I really have no idea what I'm going to do?
I think it's important to broaden your base if you don't know what you want to do, because for all sorts of things, there's always generic things that is applicable to whatever career you're going into. So for most careers, you're going to have to share involvement in audits or involvements, for example, in teaching. You can still do generic audits and get involved in support a medical student just to build a generic baseline. So you've got something, and then try to get experience in different specialties. So make the most of your actual foundation rotations to know if it's what you want to do. So I'm really glad that I chose to do my surgery rotation first, because although I knew I wanted to do surgery since medical school, a part of me was still like, okay, this is my blanket cushion to decide if I don't want to do surgery, this is it, because then I've got the rest of F1 to sort of change my mind. In F1, you'll also have the opportunity to do taster weeks as well, so I'm trying to organise mine at the moment. Make the most of those opportunities. You also get self-development time as well, so make the most of those. Although you can use them to be at home, they should be for career and self-development opportunities. Make the opportunity to go and do that as well, and just explore and just talk to people ahead of you. Go in a mass and ask people what they're doing. So yeah.
So there's sort of two overarching things there for me. One is about, okay, you don't know what to do. How are you going to find out? Sort of how are you going to make that decision? How are you going to find out? And that's, I don't know what to do now, but what's my plan to making that decision? So that's number one. And then number two is that at some stage you're going to be having to apply and you're going to need a portfolio and a good CV. So the fact that you don't know what to do, that doesn't stop you building a really, really good portfolio with some rock solid, projects or whatever.
Yeah, so I always try to try and do like an audit per rotation. I think it's very doable. There's always opportunities to get involved with kind of just your department audits anyway, and then try and seek other opportunities. So because I'm doing the specialized foundation program in med ed, I don't actually have ENT as part of one of my foundation rotations, so I'm making sure that I'm going out to find opportunities like outside of that, so that I'm still inclined with what I want to do and staying on top of it. There's always a way if you're determined.
Yeah. You talked in the beginning about the long shifts and sort of in how, I mean, I'm guessing maybe both physically and emotionally challenging that is. So tell me about, this jump from, sitting in a lecture for 3 hours or an hour and a half to all of a sudden having to be on your feet for 12 hours.
It's a big jump. I think it's quite interesting because before you start F1, everyone's like, make sure you take breaks, make sure you take breaks. Until you're actually doing those shifts, you realize how easy it is to go without having a break. And I remember at the start of F1, I was going through 12-hour shifts, only having 15-minute breaks. Or what I was doing, I was just eating in front of a computer and continuing to write discharge letters. And it got to the point where I was just so exhausted, particularly when you have the Monday to Thursdays, 8 to 8:30 consecutively, go home, sleep, repeat. I just felt like I was just in a rut and I wasn't able to make the most of my evenings. And although sometimes you're just so tired, you just have to sleep. I wasn't looking after myself well-being. So some advice I always do is actually try to make sure you go away to have your lunch, because actually just have a break from the environment that you're in, whether that is just going to the mess or just going to sit in Costa, like it's really important, because it's very easy not to take a break, and it's actually very scary how easy it is to do that. I think lots of water. I know it sounds kind of basic, but it's so easy to go so long without drinking any water. I'm known for having snacks. I always have like a tub of grapes or like an apple in my bag, because you actually need it to keep on going, because it is really hard going, and because it's quite a quick turnaround of patients, particularly when you're on call and you're walking all over the hospital. I'm easily doing over 10,000 steps every time I'm on call. You need to like keep your energy up, because it is exhausting, and that's why going to the gym and doing activities outside of the work is really important as well, just to keep your overall strength and help up anyway.
Mhm. I guess people would say, "Oh, I'm busy. I've got all of this to do. I haven't got time to eat." Um, what would you say to that?
Batch cooking.
Okay.
If you didn't batch cook in uni, you have to batch cook now. I've kept that going. I'm trying not to put. I mean, where I work, we have Subway, 1 minute walk from the mess, which is probably the most strategically placed Subway ever. And although there had been times I'm like, oh, I wouldn't mind a Subway, actually bringing your own food and batch cooking is really good. So in the weekends, what I do, I kind of iron my scrubs, do all my batch cooking for the week, and you feel so much better for actually, and also just saving money, because I think that's something foundation doctors aren't good at, is actually prioritizing this money that you suddenly have, because you had no money in med school and now you do.
It's interesting, actually. I wish I'd known that because from when I started medical school to kind of halfway through my registrar years, I put on weight 40 kilos
Wow.
starting. I mean, I've lost it and kept it on, but it's actually really, really interesting sort of how, for me personally, how unhealthy
Yeah.
sort of
And I think also that environment of, oh, let me just buy it, just Costa. Oh, does anybody want a Costa? Just those, even just those tapping your card on those machines, and it piles up, and you don't realize that actually what you're putting into your body actually isn't helping you. And I found that I put on a lot of weight in my first rotation as well, just because I was snacking so much because I was so hungry, but also just kind of comfort eating when I get home. I didn't really know what to do with myself. So you really do have to find that balance.
there's something for me there about a mindset that asks what's the consequences. Okay, so I'm eating rubbish, I'm not resting, I'm not taking breaks. What's the consequences? And
Mm,
I sort of guess, certainly, if I think, for me personally, the consequences are, I'm tetchy, I'm bad
mm,
tempered, sort of, I get resentful, burn
mm,
out. So that's the consequences, and it's very easy to say, oh, today I'm going to work hard, today I'm going to go without a break, today I'm going to
mm.
go without food. Well, that's okay today, but that's not a strategy
No.
for the next 50
And
years.
it has a secondary impact on your friendships, on your family. I made an intentional decision, sort of not to kind of plan stuff kind of 2 months into me starting. I gave myself my first kind of a month and a half to 2 months. Um, not planning things, just to give myself time to adjust. It's a new city, it's a new job, it's a new church, there's a lot of change at once, quite overwhelming. So actually having to commit to kind of events and activities and feeling really guilty you can't attend, I don't want to put that added pressure on myself. Just wanted to see what it was like and then find the balance.
Mhm.
um but actually sometimes when you're so exhausted and you do what you would like to go out and see your friend, and you feel really guilty that you can't because you're so tired, that's okay, but you do have to find that balance. I think I realized almost after a month in, that I'm taking ownership of my time here. I'm not gonna let my job be the sole thing what I do. The job is just a job, and I have a life as well. And I think people need to remember that this is not. You need to have that distinguishment between what is you and what is the job. Otherwise, you probably will get quite suffocated with it.
Mhm. Mhm. So let's wrap this up then. So what would be your top tips for doctors at work?
So I think my first tip is prioritize your well-being. Make sure you've got a support network to debrief about the things that you're encountering, making sure that you make the use of your supervisors and really escalate if you do have concern. My second tip, also well-being related, is make sure you eat well, plan your food. and really just look after your body. If you do have time to go to the gym or go for walks, do it. Third tip is staying on top, preparing is really important. So portfolio, set aside some time, maybe once every 2 weeks or so, just making sure that you're staying on top of your learning and tracking your teaching and your cases as well. Set goals for what you want to achieve in your rotation is really important. My fourth tip would be I think just all about making the most of your colleagues as well. You really have to work collaboratively when you're starting as an F1 and relying on others and helping each other out. Make the intentional effort to get to know your colleagues. So you might be a bit of an introvert, but actually make the effort to maybe go to one F1 social or organise a team dinner, which I did, and I found that it really helped with the dynamics of the team people you're working with. And I think that's really important because you want to build the networks. And then my final fifth tip would just be just to say you're not alone. And what I mean by that is that you really do ask for help. I found that when I first started, I always felt a bit embarrassed to ask for help, but actually I learned so much by asking questions, and people expect you to ask for help. And in fact, if you're not asking for help, they're sort of concerned you're not. So make sure you do.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you.